Hey, I'd like to welcome you to another episode of Mission Matters. My name is Adam Torres, and if you'd like to apply to be a guest on the show, just head on over to missionmatters.com and click on Be Our Guest to apply. All right, so today I have Samir Vig on the line, and he's managing partner at Bear Ventures. Samir, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Adam. Pleasure to be here.
Oh man, Samir, for those who've been watching this show for a long time, they know that these are my favorite episodes. Whenever we can help someone launch a podcast, like we'll talk about Bear Ventures podcast today, but whenever we could do that, I mean, it just warms my little podcasting heart. So I'm excited to talk about the podcast that you launched, also to talk about, of course, Bear Ventures and how you're helping your clients. But just to get us kicked off, we'll start this episode like we start them all with our Mission Matters Minute. So Samir, we at Mission Matters, we amplify stories for entrepreneurs, executives, and experts. That's our mission. Samir, what mission matters to you?
It's a good question. I think what maybe really run towards this was the idea of just opening the book on venture capital. I remember trying myself to learn what in the world is venture capital early on in my career. And there's just not a lot of resource. You can learn, tidbits from here and there and searching online, but to learn, what a venture capital fund does, get a firsthand look inside the fund, see how they invest, understand the opportunities for individuals who've never done it before. Is it really right for me or not? These are some of the things that I would have loved answered. And, now being in the industry, would love to help others answer as well.
Yeah, that's great. And I love bringing mission-based entrepreneurs, executives on the line to share why they do what they do and what you're doing really with kind of democratizing the knowledge and the flow and venture capital, which in my opinion, I agree with you completely. And at one point it was kind of like that closed secret. You hear it like VCs, venture capital. If you're not in the startup game or working it actively, then you don't really know what it is. It's just another term, VC, M&A. Like, what does all this stuff mean? So excited to get further into this with you. And maybe that's a good starting point. Maybe a little bit further back in your career, like how did you get started in the business?
Yeah, it was definitely a fun process. So I actually started my career in the world of consulting amongst the big four, working with large corporate 500s. And, it's really interesting to see how they're run. These are very successful companies, but, internally their processes could, use a little work, for lack of better words. And so, I started to look at, new SaaS products in the market and, how to, do things better for big enterprise. And I was enamored by what was being done at these big venture capital firms. And so, having a short stint as a founder myself for a prop tech company, I decided that, it's time that I want to go help other founders and start investing in some of these companies myself. I ended up interning for a reg tech, fintech focused fund here in DC early on when I was still a student in grad school, and then helped, run an accelerator program in New York. For me, it was really showing my value of being able to work with founders. And I think that's why I fit so well into the accelerator program I was at. From there, working day in and day out with these startup founders and, understanding the struggles firsthand of what it takes to build a big business. I think that's what helped launch me into the world of venture capital as an investor. I kind of view Bear as my way of being an entrepreneur again, while still being an investor and doing it all at once.
That's awesome. And I know there's some startup founders that'll be watching this and going forward. And I always think it's interesting to get the point of view of, because now you're in both shoes, right? So you have your own startup, right? One thing, but then you're also investing and doing what you do. Like, what kind of advice would you give to the people that are out there right now? They haven't quite. So I have a very specific question. They haven't quite started their first business, but they're really itching. Like, they might be in corporate America right now. They might have this idea. They're hearing all this stuff about startups, and the word entrepreneurs become so sexy. I don't agree with that, by the way. I think the word entrepreneur is synonymous with pain, but that's my opinion.
Yeah,
But what kind of
fun.
exactly? But what kind of advice would you give to people that are out there just kind of sitting on ideas and just really thinking about taking them to that next step of just kind of taking that leap?
Yeah, no, I think the biggest part of it all is, first getting a lot of conviction in what you're looking to build.
Yeah.
You're right. The word entrepreneur is very sexy, as is the word startup and venture capital and everything in the ecosystem. And, it's what drags a lot of people to actually think about it in the first place. But I think to find, a problem you're passionate about or have an idea of a
Right.
solution that you see like conviction in is really the first step. From there, a lot of people overthink, I think, ideas very early on and never get to actually launch or try something.
Yeah.
Um, I have, under my belt, several failed opportunities that,
Mhm.
I tried when I was, a younger founder at the time. And, they're all learning experiences. So I think, find a problem you're passionate about, get conviction around what it is you're building, and just try it. There's more resource than ever now. Shameless plug, Bear Ventures podcast is also
Yeah.
one. But generally, there's a lot more that you can do, and talk to your network. Most
Yeah.
people know somebody who's tried to start something in the past, or might know, or have access to an
Mhm.
investor, or somebody that they can get introduced to. It's always good to hear experiences of others, and that's one of the things that I'm looking to do with this podcast as well.
Mhm.
But unless you try it, you never really know.
Yeah.
So I think that's kind of the first step to get started.
It's awesome. Let's switch gears a bit. So I do want to go further into Bear Ventures, so the firm. So we understand venture capital, and you did mention some things about wanting to make it more accessible for people to access this type of space. So maybe tell us a little bit more about your vision overall for the firm.
Yeah. So Bear Ventures is a bit of a hybrid model.
Mhm.
And so what that means is, part of the fund is invested as a fund to fund strategy where we
Yeah.
deploy capital into who we believe are the top performing venture fund managers. And then the other piece of the portfolio is direct investments into both the best performing companies in those portfolios that we have access to, and additionally other startups that we just know from the network.
Mhm.
And so what this does is it allows people to get a downside protection through diversification of the fund to funds piece, and enhanced upside, as I like to call it, through the
Yeah.
direct portfolio. And so one of the big pieces around why I built the fund and what I'm looking to grow with is individuals have never really had access to a true fund to funds vehicle. Traditionally, over the last few decades, most institutional investors in the asset class got their exposure through the fund to funds model. And
Yeah.
so now, for one of the first times in history, individuals, or accredited individuals, that is, they have the opportunity to come into a vehicle that has fund to funds exposure.
Mhm.
And we are really differentiated from the idea that we invest in not just the traditional big branded firms, but also emerging managers, which have very outsized performance historically, and
Mhm.
additionally these direct investments.
And so I want to break down this term that you're using in your model because it's a common one that's thrown around, but there's different let's say definitions for it. So what do you mean by fund to funds?
So fund to funds is a topic that's confusing to a lot of
Yeah.
people, and quite honestly, until I joined one, was confusing to me as well. The idea is that we raise capital from a pool of investors, and
Mhm.
then we deploy it into other funds. So
Yeah.
traditionally, if somebody thinks of a venture capital fund and they're an investor in the fund, that fund will go deploy into 10, 20, 30 plus companies.
Yeah.
In contrast, a fund to fund invest into those fund managers.
Yeah.
And so now, if you were to put a dollar into a fund, that dollar could be split amongst several fund managers or VC
Yeah.
funds. And then those VC funds will deploy into several companies.
Mhm. And the way I like to think of it, just to make it like really easy, is if you think about like a lot of people that are watching this probably heard of mutual funds. So it's just
Mhm.
basically saying instead, let's just say you had a mutual fund or you had a fund,
Mhm.
and then you're investing in not necessarily just the individual companies, you're investing in another mutual fund or another fund manager. So you're putting all of those into that bucket. So it gives you a more, and the idea is more diversification, possibly. I mean, give us some of the benefits of maybe going that approach versus others.
Yeah, when you look at these venture fund managers,
Mm.
first and foremost, there's new managers popping up every day.
Yeah.
It's good to first find the managers and then have the expertise to really evaluate who's the best fit for a portfolio.
Hmm.
And so I think that's really the first hurdle. Once you start to come across who, potentially might be the best performer for your investment, they're often access restricted. So
Yeah.
you find a fund that you like, you can't just pick up the phone, call the partners and say, "Hey, I want in."
Yeah.
It's more of a relationship game, and trying to find a way to get
Mhm.
access to invest. So first you've got the hurdle of finding the fund, then evaluating the fund, then actually getting into the fund. And let's say you were able to achieve that. The next
Yeah.
issue is that it's a high minimum and you can only deploy into maybe one or two funds.
Yeah.
Investing into a fund of funds, you surpass all of those hurdles with one check.
Hmm.
And additionally, you're able to diversify across multiple pools or multiple
Hmm.
funds. And so that's one of the key benefits of going down this road and approach.
Yeah, accessibility is huge. And that's the idea of kind of democratizing the idea of being able to get into different investments. I love that. It makes the barrier of entry for accredited investors a little bit easier than what it would take. And also the relationship part. Not all managers have to accept the money, right?
That's very true, and oftentimes they don't. There's more capital than ever coming into the market, and
Yeah.
people have really understood the value of being in this type of an asset class. So, when you couple that with more dollars ever going towards
Yeah.
investment in the market, it becomes even more tough to get into the best investments.
Yeah. So tell me about industries, like focus, geographies, like tell me a little bit more about the process of what you're looking for to add to the
Mhm.
portfolio. Mhm.
Yeah, so from our portfolio, Fund One is really a US based focused fund.
Mhm.
From what we look at internally on the fund of fund side, we do everything from pre seed to pre IPO, which is
Mm.
really differentiated from other fund of funds who mostly will look at early stage investments. And the reason we do that is because our LP or investor base
Yeah.
is mostly individuals who like some sort of a capital return back sooner. And so
Mm.
those later stage portfolio investments are what start to exit before the early stage ones and start to
Yeah.
have some sort of return profile back to the investors. We are mostly enterprise focused. There might be some consumer by way of a look through exposure of the funds we're in, but really it's an enterprise focused fund. And then
Mm.
on the direct investment piece, it's a little bit different in that we start to look at companies at what I like to call the early growth stage.
Mm.
People call different rounds, Series A, B, C, D, et cetera. And
Yeah.
everybody in the space will tell you that those letters don't really matter anymore. What
Mm.
I like to look at really, and more so, is their stage of the business.
Yeah.
Have they got what I think of as a proof of concept for an enterprise business? 10 million above of revenue, or as an ARR number as a proof of concept, and that's really where I like to see, less of a downside and more protection, yet still
Yeah.
see that the business has a lot of upside as it's already proven the model.
Mm. What about types of companies? Is there any specific? Is technology companies? You're looking at SaaS companies. Like, what is the focus?
Yeah, so the focus is mostly SaaS.
Mm.
And so within SaaS, there's a lot of verticals that we'll look at.
Yeah.
One of those is fintech, my background being in fintech and a lot of our access being in
Yeah.
fintech. And I've also served on the board of an interim CEO of another fintech company that we had exited. So, that's really the bread and butter of where a lot of our focus and attention goes. But
Mhm.
I do focus more broadly as well. We're looking at things like, and not to throw out buzzwords, but
I like it. Give us some buzzwords. Come on, Samir. We're not
a lot
scared.
of words. It'll be like the first page of TechCrunch. Uh, you know, Companies that are really utilizing data, and I know everybody says that, but not every company, I think, will utilize it as strongly. People say that I implement AI and ML and data, and the words sound great, but those that are truly accessing
Mhm.
a unique and proprietary data source, those that have better analytics over
Yeah.
the others, and those that have really automated the process more so than others,
Mhm.
that's another focus area where we're looking at, especially on the direct side and for the founders that we look to work with.
Yeah. So speaking of the founders, I know this is a popular question to ask VCs, and I always like to ask it whenever I have someone on the show. Is what are some of the traits of the founder specifically that you look in when making an investment?
Yeah, and I'll answer both from founders of funds and
Yeah.
founders of companies. When I look at the founders of funds, and this is a topic that's not really covered, many or much, but the
Yeah.
idea is that these are founders that either have come from other large funds, or
Mhm.
in my case, I love those that have been operators at some point that can understand really how businesses run. I
Yeah.
like to look at the track record of what they've invested in or done in the
Mhm.
past. I like to see, potentially, who else is coming onto the team. What is their vision in growing the fund? Having a larger vision beyond a fund one and a fund two, but
Yeah.
where do they view the end state of what they're trying to build? I think it's possible and easier for somebody to have a very short term view of, I have some deals now and I want to raise some money to start a fund, but you
Mhm.
know I get really excited about people that talk about funds 4 and 5 and 6 when they're still just starting out, trying to show what kind of access and brand they're looking to
Mhm.
build, what kind of a network that they're able to utilize, what kind of returns they can achieve based on what they have access to, and that really excites me.
Yeah.
that's one of the reasons that, most fund of funds may not touch, as many emerging managers, but
Mhm.
the majority of the funds we work with, are, what I call emerging managers.
Mhm.
On the founder side for companies, it is really important to evaluate the team now more than ever. When you look at where, multiples and valuations are currently, you have to really believe in the story of the team.
Yeah.
And to the story of the team, you have to believe in the team in itself.
Mhm.
And so, I'd say most of my work actually goes into who is the team
Yeah.
and around them, on top of what the business is. And I think we're seeing more and more of that across the board.
Yeah, that's exciting. And what I like about it is what, as you mentioned earlier, the the amount of money that's entering the market and the amount of potential. I feel like it's just a great time for innovation. Just overall, like there's lots of things happening.
Yeah, no, there is, and a lot of people think that the early 2000s and what happened over the
Mhm.
last 10 years. Some people view it as a lot has happened, and I think that multiples are kind of crazy, and where do you go from here?
Yeah.
I've actually been asked the question, why are you starting a fund now?
Yeah.
And the answer to me is actually simple. I think we're at the early innings of things like I mentioned fintech before,
Yeah.
you know, payments and processing, and
Mhm.
stage 1 and 2 of what I call fintech. Versions 1 and 2.0 have already
Yeah.
happened, but we're now coming into the early innings of a 3 and a 4.0, right?
Mhm.
Ideas that underwriting for customers is now vastly different. You're no longer working for credit score, but
Yeah.
maybe cash flow underwriting. Things in the enterprise where there used to be a SaaS offering that would come out and better the internal processes, but
Mhm.
now parts of the process that used to be manual are now becoming automated.
Yeah.
People's way of interacting with these systems is vastly different from where it used to be, and so that's kind of the way I think about it.
Exciting times, Samir, exciting times. And speaking of excitement, I want to talk about this podcast. So the Bear Ventures podcast. So, I mean, what was the idea for this launch? Because when I heard like kind of the name, the concept, what some of the things you wanted to do, I'm like, this is going to be awesome. So, what was kind of your concept for launching the podcast?
I had the exact same feeling, Adam. So the podcast, really was to teach and educate the market on how
Yeah.
funds work. The first piece and the first episodes will be around me talking to different fund managers, covering various topics such as early stage investing, growth
Yeah.
stage investing. What do you do as a fund
Mhm.
manager? What is differentiated about various strategies? Why should people be excited about venture
Mhm.
capital as an investment asset class? And so, really opening the book on funds as they are
Yeah.
today. Most people don't have access to funds, don't know how to get into funds. They
Yep.
might have gone to a website, and seen access to, secondary shares of a company. And then when you
Yeah.
mention the fund, they don't even know what it means. You know, Trying to get people comfortable with the asset class and, getting them to the place
Mhm.
where that they're able to make an informed decision of, is this the right asset class for me? Running Bear Ventures, I spend a lot of my time with new investors that have never been in the asset class
Mm.
before. But once they start to understand the return profile and that the
Yeah.
risk profile is not really what one would imagine just from watching the news, it starts to get more and more exciting to them. And to do that on a larger scale through a podcast, not just one-on-one
Yeah.
conversations, allows me to have a greater reach.
Yeah, I love the idea and specifically that concept of even interviewing fund managers. I've listened to a ton of podcasts. I mean, we do it all the time. I know I've never launched one like this before, and so when I thought about it, I'm like, oh wow, like I want to know the conversations that you are having with fund managers. Like I want that behind the scenes, like that extra access. Like I want to know what's going on because really, what do we know? We know maybe if we read a white paper, we read some other things, but I feel like just the conversation, the video, to see the faces, to hear, it feels kind of like I feel like the audience, and I've listened to your first episode. I feel like the audience, and as of this time, just for dating this is December 2021, so the first episode's out, and many, many more I know that you have on the production schedule, just for context. But I did listen to your first episode, and I kind of felt like I was in the boardroom, like I was sitting there listening to, and I'm like, oh, this is going to be a really fun podcast to kind of be a fly on the wall of these conversations.
Yeah, when I worked at the accelerator and
Mhm.
as a direct investor, focusing just on companies, never had, as much of an insight into
Yeah.
how does a conversation with a fund actually work? Because I was in a fund,
Yeah.
We have people who, we used to raise from, but those conversations really, to your point, are closed off to a small
Hmm.
group of people. And to open that up, to your point, is very exciting to me.
Yeah,
Most funds outside of the website, won't have as much material out there, especially emerging managers.
for sure.
The story out there, and to let people understand there's a wide array of different types of funds. What are they? How do they work? And who are they? Um, you know, I think is fun, although I'm a bit of a dork, I guess. So hopefully others find that fun as well.
No, no, no. Especially people looking for investment ideas. I mean, that's the thing because even as you're having these conversations, I think one of the fun things about, and I mean, my background, I worked in finance for many years, but I think one of the most fun things that I used to get out of some of those conversations is even when you're not just talking about the direct investment, you're talking about industry trends, like what's going on in the world, but you're doing it from a different vantage point. You're doing it from the vantage point of somebody that's considering deploying capital, not just you into a potential fund, but the fund manager that's deploying capital into other ventures possibly. And along this entire ecosystem, if you will, or supply chain of investment and of opportunity, you're getting a viewpoint from like all different angles of the startup world and just a different lens, I feel. And for that one, I feel like it adds a different layer to the normal content, which not putting anybody's content down, but the normal content that you would have if you're just talking one-on-one maybe with a startup founder. Not saying there's anything wrong with that, but I host a podcast called Startup Garage, so nothing wrong with that. But this to me adds just a whole nother layer of thought process to it. And for the audience, I just really think they're going to benefit from tuning in.
Oh, I appreciate that. I agree. It's a very invaluable perspective to hear directly from those writing the checks, and at the same time, getting their view on where they think the market's going. Whether you're another fund manager or a founder or just an individual looking to see where do I invest next.
Yeah.
That kind of insight, I do agree is invaluable.
It's awesome. So Samir, I know you're a busy guy between Bear Ventures and now the Bear Ventures podcast. What's next? I mean, what's next for you? What's next for the firm?
I continue to deploy from, our fund one. We're a newer fund, but, almost done with the first fundraise, which is very exciting. And, plan to launch a fund two in the not too distant future. More to come on that. But in the meantime, we'll continue to really build awareness of the asset class through recording more podcasts and having more conversations and getting the word out, not just on Bear Ventures, the fund and the podcast, but the industry, more broadly. We're in the early innings of what I view as a very long-term franchise. So I'm excited for what's to come.
Oh, that is exciting. So first off, I mean, it's been great having you on the show. I wish you more continued success, both with Bear Ventures and the podcast. I'm excited to syndicate your content through missionmatters.com. So we created your author page up there, and we'll definitely be bringing all this content to our audience. But if somebody wants to follow up, they want to connect, they want to learn more about Bear Ventures in general, I mean, what's the best way for them to do that?
Yeah, no, definitely, follow us on www.barevc.com. That's BAREVC.com. Or follow me on LinkedIn. I think that's the best way to get updates. And as they continue to release podcasts and news, that's the best place to follow.
Wonderful. Well, Samir, again, awesome having you on the show today. And to the audience, as always, thank you for tuning in. Hope you got a lot of value out of this. If this is your first time tuning in, just know at Mission Matters, we're all about bringing on entrepreneurs, executives, and experts and really finding out what their mission is, what their passion is, like why do they do what they do, and how are they bringing value to this world. So we're all about that. If you're into that type of content, definitely hit that subscribe button. We want you to be a return visitor and viewer. We have many more guests coming up for you, and we don't want you to miss anything. And Samir, really, it has been a pleasure, and I'm looking forward to episode 2 of Bear Ventures podcast. So again, thank you for coming on the show.
Appreciate the time, Adam, as always.